Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. And I'd just like to add a little perspective about that. I think this opportunity of gaining understanding and being able to propagate experiences from around the world on these large systems is just phenomenal. So I think we should acknowledge the Chair for setting up and having the vision to start this, which looks like, Dr. Enright didn't say, but it looks like this could just be the start of a much more in-depth relationship in the coming years. Okay, well, there's 5 items in the lead scientist report, and I'll go through those fairly quickly. If you have questions, of course, please do interrupt. The first thing is, over the last 3 weeks, it's been a very busy time for science meetings related to Delta Science. And as you can see there, the Samanid Restoration Conference was held in Davis from April the 4th to the 7th. Just to give you an idea of the scale of this meeting, on Thursday there were workshops and field trips. Over 350 people participated in that. And for the Friday and Saturday meeting, there was over 650 people. So just a tremendous interest at that meeting. That was followed last week by a joint conference that has gone on for the last few years. And I apologize for misstating QEMF, which is a little embarrassing as it's part of my community. QEMF stands for the California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum. This organization is a collaboration between the modeling communities, and this was a record attendance. So this meeting's been going on for, 15 years or so now. There was 189 delegates representing 48 different organizations. So truly it represented the modeling community that are working for everyone from the NGOs, water contractors, and the various agencies, and of course academics. That was hosted in collaboration with IEP, the Interagency Ecological Program, and I won't mention that. I'll let my colleague, Dr. Muller-Solberg, give a more in-depth about that meeting. But the advantage of these meetings coming so close together is it really allowed for a very deep, I would say, scientific dialogue to go on, not just in the presentations, but when you were just walking around the corridors, the level of conversations that were going on was really quite remarkable. And so it really brought to mind the thing that in pursuit of a common truth, it was really what I felt people were trying to get to. It also gave us an opportunity to promote the Science Fellows program and also to talk a little bit with individuals about the development of the science program. I'll talk in a moment. And I'm not going to spend too much time about the highlights from the conference. Dr. Muller-Solberg will give a brief summary from what we in the science program, and I think IEP, thought were some of the major findings. But just as a couple of the major comments which I really noticed having been out of California for a little while. And it seems that the investment that agencies have been making in terms of the technologies is really starting to pay off right now. And so just as a couple of quick examples, the SmeltCam technology, not only for a non-intrusive way of being able to monitor and detect these very elusive fish, but it's just incredibly cool technology to watch. So in terms of getting K through 12 kids engaged in what's going on, you see these fish come through, they flash, the lights catch them just for a split second. And you can imagine the technology challenges of that fraction of a second when the fish is aligned correctly, where you can actually identify the species, is quite remarkable. So the merging of computer science and biology and electrical engineering is fantastic.
Are you going to prepare an app like the Penguin Cam that I have? Yeah, it's great. If you've ever seen it, you can just watch the penguins at the San Francisco Zoo whenever you want. You could do the same thing. You could have SmeltCam. I mean, I'm actually not joking.
No, actually, that sort of technology for getting folks engaged is great. The second thing that I really noticed was a move between using technologies by all parties to make data available. And I think we're right on this cutting edge, but suddenly people are looking at how do you get data and information out there to the broadest possible audience. And the third thing, which was absolutely remarkable in how this technology is being used, just to look at one example, you're looking at the survival of juvenile salmon through different migration corridors through the Delta. And of course, there's huge differences in whether they go down through the main channel, where they get hung up, how long they're actually in the system. And so actually being able to see and process that data is going to revolutionize, I think, how we can manage this system in the most effective way. So those were the meetings, and I'll let Dr. Muller-Solberg talk in more depth about the IEP access. The second agenda item here is the Science Fellows Program. We're very enthusiastic about this. We did a lot of promotion at those 3 science meetings. I would also encourage everyone in the room. This is a wonderful, wonderful program. Please go back to your constituents, take a look, and if you can identify talented young folks to come in and work with you and with academia jointly to build these connections, please get the word out. We want this to be a highly competitive program where we really attract some of the best young researchers to the Delta Science. The third item here, which is an important one, next week, Monday and Tuesday, we're going to phase 2 of the BDCP effects review. And just as a comment for a new person to the program, I think these phased approaches to reviews really is working very, very well. Because if you wait right to the end of the process and then you bring in an external panel for something that is as complicated as the effects analysis, you'll often get totally different opinions and it's too late to do things. But by spreading out into what's going to be, I assume, at least a 3-phase process, it allows for that dialogue between the scientists on both sides. And I think the product will be a lot better for it. So phase 1, which was completed at the beginning of October last year, looked at the draft conceptual foundation and the analytical framework of the effects analysis, which will go into BDCP. A very brief summary of the findings of that. The review panel encouraged a more holistic approach to the way that the effects were done, and they also asked for more detail on the analysis and models which were put in place. Phase 2, which will start Monday, is looking at the full Chapter 5, with the main part of the chart just looking at the scientific soundness and completeness of the analysis. So they will be looking at Chapter 5, the associated appendices, with 2 notable exceptions. First of all, Appendix 5E, which deals with habitat restoration, will not be reviewed at this time. And 5G, the fish life cycle models, which are still very much under development. They were presented a lot in the 3 meetings I mentioned. That will come later in the process. So that was the third item. The fourth item, I just wanted to make a very brief comment about the science plan. I think all of the staff within the Delta Science program are very excited about this. This is actually why they're working in the science program, and it also represents a tremendous opportunity to do something special. What we're very concerned about is this science plan really needs to reflect the entire science communities. So what is the current thinking for where the science is going? What are the priorities? And of course our goal is to put out a science plan that supports the Delta plan, but not just be limited to people working on that. We hope this is a document that people in academia will be writing NSF proposals and things to help build this more comprehensive understanding. Another concern that we've had, and why we spent time in the presentation, certainly that I gave during those 3 meetings, was to talk a little about how we're going to go about doing this. And our concern is that there's obviously very key thinkers in every particular stakeholder group that you look at. And those people right now are just totally slammed for time, whether they're working on the Delta Plan, BDCP, whether they're in academia. So we really want to make sure that those key people that represent all of the various aspects are fully engaged in the process. And we want to do that in a way that respects their time. So clearly there's several ways that we could go about doing this, everything from a series of meetings that personally I don't think is the way to go with busy folks. And at the other end of the spectrum, if you look at some of the recent NSF initiatives, it's done almost entirely through what they call cyber collaboratories, everything online. So we spent time talking to key folks over the last 2 weeks about asking them what would work for them, given what they've got coming up over the next 12 months, what's going to be the most effective way that they would like to be engaged. So that's the...
I should probably just add a note. An initial stage of designing a process for developing is... I'm in favor of opportunities to be heard and all this, but the need for a clearly articulated science plan, not a process, but a science plan, is just more and more evident to me every day we sit here. And I understand the players are all overworked and everybody's committed and so on, but the reality is we can't, in the same way the Independent Science Board can't wait to do a good job until every single piece of paper in BDCP that anyone has ever offered to produce is produced. The science plan has to start to be developed now. I mean, this is one where I think the science program, your part of the council, it's really your proposed plan. And giving the stakeholders an opportunity to engage in comments, criticisms, arguments is fine. But the timing of it is to serve the council's needs and the needs of the new legislation. And so I frankly, I think it has a very high priority, and it becomes really important to see a point in time rapidly where we could see a first draft of a plan, not simply a process to go through a year of discussion to then get to whatever it is.
No, actually, I agree with the need of the plan, and I think the expectations for the science plan are extremely high. Mm-hmm. I do think that it's going to be very important to build on what's out there, what's already been thought about by key groups like IEP, for example. To capture that information and make sure it's consistent with those priorities. And so that's really what we've been exploring. I think if we were to sit back as a science program, produce a plan, run it through ISB, I think we run the risk of it being, yes, that's a nice document that's out there, but it isn't really going to feed or drive or be the catalyst for science across the Delta. So I share your concern. We need to have the process. We need to start that discussion to get to not the discussion, we need to start the planning process to get the draft out there.
Well, okay. I'd prefer to see the Goodwin plan or the Mueller-Solger plan in writing proposed at a conference in the next 4 months, illustrating here's what a Delta plan should look like. Not a process, but the content of a Delta plan. Because my experience is no matter how smart and talented people are, unless they're given something to react to, everyone goes through 19 months of conversation about who should be involved and who shouldn't be involved and what should be studied. I mean, this is a governmental process. It is not initially an academic process, and that means we need something that policymakers can utilize, and we can propose legislation based upon if it's understood. So I understand the difficulties of it, but my prod is to move faster, and I'm not opposed to the Delta lead scientist, if you have a personal position, laying it out. Not because that is a position of the Delta Council, but it's how you start a discussion within any community. And yes, people throw bricks at you and yell at you and all of that. even us might do that. But I think, I think this is too important not to push hard on developing a more refined and clear science plan.
Right. Okay. Noted. That's a good thing. So we will come back with that process. And just as a footnote, I think perhaps what we learned through the NSF Waters and Cleaner initiatives, were that we didn't have that framework. It was basically 7 years, and a lot of good things came out of it. But the whole, whatever it was, $350 million effort actually foundered because it lost energy over that time. Mm-hmm. So to have a start, finish time, we will definitely do that. Yes, Mr. Fiorini.
Randy.
Doctor, in describing the approach to developing the Delta Plan, it sounded to me, and this was just a couple of sentences in your comments, is that the science community, the Independent Science Board, the science program, would identify the work that has been done, the knowledge that's available, and then identify the gaps. That's one approach. Is that the approach, or will it be more comprehensive and more directive than that?
No, actually what we're doing is two things. We've been soliciting and pulling together examples of science plans for other similar major ecosystem restoration programs, not only in the US but around the world. So we're going to be looking at those and how effective those science plans were in achieving the objective. The second thing, which came out very strongly last week, and was that there has been a lot of thinking already done by all parties that identify what the key issues are for certain questions. And so what we want to make sure is that where there's already groups of sat together, have articulated that, we want to use that as a starting point. Then we will take those two sets of information, and as Mr. Eisenberg pointed out, that then we will build that around the framework and as an example of what we think will work here. So that's the process that we've just embarked on.
So it will include some advice and some direction, and more than simply a report on the current status.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Mr. Nordhoff.
The original date that we had to finalize the plan was towards the end of next year, which would be 12 months out. That was a tentative thing that we had put out.
It's actually a deadline that we put on ourselves in the Delta Plan, is that there be a completed Delta Science Plan by the end of next year.
Ms. Gray? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a long time. Do you need all that time?
Yeah.
That's not a rhetorical question.
You want an answer?
I think that we could. It just depends on the level of consensus we put in. The big programs I've been involved with the National Science Foundation, building our state science and technology program. What happened down in Louisiana, the one that was done for the government of Singapore. All of those were running about at least a 2-year time frame. So I hope, because we're building from a much stronger base here, that it would be possible to do it faster. And certainly we're going to have draft documents you're out there for comment well before then. But a lot, I think, will depend if we're looking to certain key groups or entities to you ensure that it's captured. A lot will depend on that sort of outside review.
Is it more a question of getting it blessed by other parties than it is about trying to find out what the available science is and apply that to a certain position in the Delta?
Yeah, I think it's more of for example, life cycle models, for example. There's huge developments going on there right now. And I think in that particular area, it's very important to be able to articulate, here's where we can do a pretty good job. And in other areas of these very complex modeling systems, where those really big gaps are. And so, in order to collect that information, for that part of the community to say, yes, this is absolutely captures our feeling and priorities for directions, we feel comfortable with that.
Isn't there a bit of a moving target here?
I think in the academic, science will never be done. So this is going to be a 5-year plan, I believe, with regular updates, which will mirror both the Delta plan updates and also the state of the Delta reports. But to start the process correctly and to give people comfort in the process, I think it's important to it won't be 100%, but to have the science community saying, yes, this makes a lot of sense. This is the roadmap for science over the next 5 years or so. So, yes, it will be a moving target, but it will be subject to regular updates.
Yeah, I think we'd all feel a lot better if you'd try to rein in that timeline a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's hard for me to know what we would be missing if we moved it in, say, 6 months, mm-hmm. other than comfort of certain people. I mean, just give them less time to get comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So perhaps what I will suggest on this is, because we've only just really started thinking through this process, is that maybe we can come back to you with a more clearer articulation of the timeline, what we're shooting for, where we feel the...
I think the timeline's also the broad categories of what a Delta plan might contain. Randy's described an approach to the whole thing. But, this comment is based on the notion, if there were a science plan, we would want to start using the science plan. That's the point. Not developing, using it. And so that's the public policy imperative, it seems to me, for speed.
Yeah, and have a discussion on that new timeline that you have, and maybe sacrifice some sorts of information in order to rein it in a bit.
Yeah, sure. Ms. Gray and then Mr. Rentz wanted to add a comment on this.
Thank you, Doctor, for your report this morning. You articulated the process in terms of development of the plan, and I think Randy kind of reiterated it. But do you see stakeholders being involved in that process and that development? And if you do, what part of it? Because I know you've engaged the science community, obviously, in development of the plan, but do you see a role for stakeholders to be in that process before the plan is developed?
I think currently our thought was that we would be reaching out to the scientists that represent all of the various stakeholders. So clearly, that if we'll talk about the journal later, but scientists from all of those various groups have been represented at the table. And so currently, and I would certainly defer to the executive director whether we need to go beyond that, we will certainly go through drafts where we want this process to be very transparent, where anyone could give comments on what that science plan would look like. Yeah. But right now, I think we were targeting much more the science community that is currently active.
Yeah, I understand you have to engage the science community because it is a science report, but perhaps Joe can talk about how stakeholders can be a part of that process, whether it's before the plan or after the plan, in terms of just looking at it and feeling that it represents exactly, the science community. I just think it's very important to kind of have some part in that process that stakeholders are engaged in comments and so forth. And before Joe answers, he may have to answer this one. I know we're talking about time frame, but my question kind of goes back to Phil. What does the council do, or the Delta Plan do with the science report? How does it fit into the Delta Plan in terms of deliberation of development of the plan? Where does it fit? And at what time is it supposed to fit? Maybe Joe or Dr. Goodwin, someone can answer.
Okay, I'll go first, and you feel free to correct me because I know I'll miss a bunch of stuff here. We've actually identified in the draft plan things that we don't know. And one of the things we'll want to do is actually coordinate with the science plan, which will help us fill in what are the things we don't know, what are the things that we're going to do to gather more data. We've identified that we want to use the adaptive management process on the Delta Plan itself so that we change as we find more information. So it will be really key that the Delta Science Plan feeds information. Ultimately, not the plan itself, but the outcomes of the plan should feed information that helps us become better at doing our jobs, whether it's updating the Delta Plan or it's follow up on the coordination and the other responsibilities that the council has. So I think we'll do that. In terms of stakeholders, I think stakeholders are really key, but it's not just that we have Mark, no offense Mark, but Mark's an attorney. And what I want to do is Valerie, who is the lead scientist for the state and federal contractors, we want to make sure that we actually get some of the people like that who actually are more into the science and make sure that those people are involved from all of the stakeholder areas. And there are many, many very, very competent technical people that can help us make sure the plan gets done right, that will then help feed information in so policymakers can make better decisions.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Hank.
I mean, having said all that, is there something that you can think of today that would be scientifically controversial that you would probably put into the science plan?
Gosh. Well, the conclusions of the science are what is always potentially controversial, but I cannot think off the top of my head of anything that you wouldn't put in there because it's controversial. That's not what this plan should be about. I think
I didn't mean that, but I mean something that we would put in that the scientific community worldwide would react to very, very unfavorably. That's probably not going to happen, is it?
No, not
we're not going to be plowing any new ground, making any statements that we can't back up.
No, but I expect some of the stuff we'll do will be cutting edge. There are many areas where the science in this region is the best in the world, where we've pushed the bounds of what's known about, and I expect that will continue.
But what's the downside of that? I mean, we base some actions on some science that's not 100% characterized.
But
what's the downside?
It's always
it is adaptive management.
That's what we have to do. We'll never have perfect information. We
Absolutely
have to act and then evaluate. So the plan, do, evaluate, and respond is the way we've summarized our adaptive management process. So you plan what you're going to do, you do it, you evaluate it, and then and respond to that. And the science plan is part of the evaluate and respond piece.
I predict that the science plan will venture into controversy if, as I believe it should, it addresses the question of how you utilize scientific opinion in an environment where, remember the phrase combat science, everybody goes out and hires their own scientists to study the same thing, and you have multiple governmental agencies with all of their own scientists. How you take that free-for-all and convert it into something that's usable by policymakers on water management and ecosystem management, which I think is probably the most important issue on a science plan. For example, I'd be shocked if you didn't reluctantly come to the conclusion that we are probably going to need for adaptive management a very fast turnaround body of scientists for really rapid responses. The Independent Science Board, I think, has been pretty good with these panels, but when you talk about management decisions, particularly in crisis situations, you cannot wait a month or 2 months or 3 months for a review panel, and what the right approach would be to utilize science and where you'd find that science in those situations is something that hopefully the Delta plan the science plan would suggest. That'll be controversial.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to justify in my own mind why it's going to take so long to come up with a science plan.
Yeah.
I'm having difficulty.
Let me suggest that we bring this item back, because I think today was just intended to kind of introduce the topic.
Yeah, bring us back a timeline and we can discuss it and
lay out
in greater detail.
Because it's a fairly complex.
And the draft Goodwin plan?
Yeah.
Okay.